Welcome, everyone. It's really lovely to see so many of you in the waiting room, waiting to join us this evening. We've got that little awkward period of time now where we just give people a minute or two to log on. So, yeah, make yourselves
Yeah.
comfortable.
I'm never sure what to
Um,
do in these minutes. I think we really should get some sort of filler music. And yeah, you know that popcorn song that goes do 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 do. I think that would fit the mood for me particularly well. Particularly if you can find the version that's done by the Swedish Chef and the Muppets. It's worth a watch.
I've got a feeling that could be a divisive choice, Brian.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
Maybe you should get your ukulele out.
It's downstairs. A brilliant new ukulele.
Oh,
For any ukulele players out there, you can now get 3D printed ukuleles, which means you can take them when you go rowing out into the middle of the lake, which has the double effect that no one else can hear you.
that's quite something. That's quite an image I have
Yeah.
in my mind
For those
there.
of you who have just arrived, please say hello. Please stick hello in the chat, which is always nice. It's always great to just get lovely people. If you could also stick in hello, put in your name and tell me where you're from. So if you're University of Reading, if you're further afield, if you are just turning up because you heard about this and you thought it was going to be fun, it is going to be fun. But just stick a quick hello in the chat to everybody, but to myself and Joe as well. We've got
Thank you
Brazil
very
already.
much.
Hey, international audience.
We got
And
Jane
Sunderland,
Setter.
international audience.
So Jane Setter was one of my tutors when I was an undergraduate. Hello, Jane.
Amazing. Oh, some brilliant people have turned up to say hi. Oh,
Okay,
all over the place.
so
This is brilliant.
while you're all saying hello, I'm just going to make a slow start to the little preamble that I deliver at the beginning of each of our monthly talks, just so that you know a bit about who we are and what we do and what the plan is for tonight. Particularly relevant if this is the first time you have attended any of our talks. So first of all, I just want to give you a very, very warm welcome. For those of you who are joining us after the break, the summer break, welcome back. I hope you had a lovely summer. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I really hope that you find tonight interesting and informative and that you sign up to attend some of our future talks as well. So before we talk about Brian and his talk tonight, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So the plan for this evening is I'm just going to tell you a bit about the Wellbeing Hub and the team. Also, just tell you a bit about how tonight's talk is going to work, and then I'm going to hand over to Brian. He's going to talk for about 45 minutes or thereabouts, and then there's going to be about 30 minutes at the end of the talk for questions, and we aim to finish promptly by 8:30. But there will be a recording of this talk, which will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which I will share the link to in just a moment. That video, once it's edited and published, you'll get a link sent to you within the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Tonight, Brian is very happy to answer questions. Please, could you put your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, because that means that I can then have one place that I go to when I pose the questions to Brian at the end of the night. So feel free to add questions anytime one pops into your mind that you want to pose to him, put it in the Q&A. Feel free to use the chat though to have a kind of talk amongst yourselves if anything is resonant for you, if you want to share resources. It's really nice to see the kind of community in the chat, so do feel free to use that for general conversation if you'd like to. What I will say is that, we have a large group tonight, so I apologise in advance if we don't get to ask your question and answer your question tonight, but we'll do our very best to get through as many of them as possible. So in terms of the Wellbeing Hub team, there's myself, Jo Billington. I'm one of the researchers here in the Centre for Autism at the University of Reading. We also have our clinical director, Fiona Knott, who's actually on holiday Normally she's here, but she's on holiday at the moment. But we do have other members of the team here tonight. Emma Harris, who's our clinical psychologist, and Hazel McCarroll, who is our administrator. So that's the four of us. And in terms of what we do at the Wellbeing Hub, well, we are a project that's really about bringing some curiosity to the idea of what is autistic thriving and flourishing. And the reason why we have chosen this focus is because we're very aware in the clinical and the research work that we do that we know an awful lot about autistic distress. We know an awful lot about the challenges that autistic people face, but we know very little about autistic well-being and autistic thriving, particularly from the perspectives of autistic people themselves. And this has really big implications. Mostly it's because actually when it comes to, how do we support autistic people who are experiencing distress, a lot of the practice around that, maybe it's clinical practice or educational practice or what happens in broader society, is often based upon what helps for non-autistic people, what they say they want and what they say benefits them. And there's a lot of evidence, both from the academic literature, but also from the testimonies of autistic people themselves, that says that actually what works for most people doesn't always work for autistic people. So there's a really strong rationale for us finding out more about autistic flourishing and thriving from the perspective of autistic people themselves. So what do we do? What is this project about? Well, the main thing is that we place autistic people at the heart of everything we do. And the aim of the hub is to pull together and kind of make this or create the foundations for an inclusive community of autistic people, their families, their allies, the professionals who work with them, to work together to build creative and meaningful solutions to support autistic children and young people in particular to lead their best lives. And we've been running since November last year, so it's almost our first anniversary. And the things that we've been doing in that year is, well, we've been running these monthly talks, every one of them on a theme to do with autistic thriving. We've also been running termly in-person special interest groups for professionals in the local area, so people who work in a professional capacity with autistic children and young people. The aim of that is to share best practice when it comes to neurodiversity affirming approaches. We've also been doing lots of work in mainstream and special schools to support teachers and parents to create better learning environments for autistic children. And also something that Emma is taking the lead on is direct work with autistic children and young people, really looking at increasing their sense of autonomy, agency and authenticity. But all of the work that we do also has an impact on training future clinicians. So we are supported by a team of placement students who are on our master's programme in clinical psychology here in the School of Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences. So we are involved in kind of training them to adopt these neurodiversity affirming approaches in the work that they might be doing in the future. And of course, everything that we're doing is being documented and hopefully will make a meaningful contribution to what we know from a research perspective. So in terms of keeping in touch with us, please email us if you want to sign up to our newsletter to find out about our activities, our programs, the things that we're having running, everything. Every month there's something new that we're developing. And of course, we run these talks on a different theme every month. Next month, just a quick plug for this, and again, I'm going to put a link to this in the chat when I've stopped talking. On the 10th of October, same time, 7 till 8:30 p.m, again via Teams, we have Dr. Amy Pearson, who is Assistant Professor at Durham University. She is an autism researcher, and she will be discussing understanding autistic masking as a response to stigma. So again, I'll put the link in there. But if you want to see any of our previous talks, they are on our YouTube channel. Not all of our talks are there because some of our speakers have either chosen not to have their talks recorded or have them recorded and published for a limited period of time. So some talks are up there, but not all of them. And again, I'll post a link to that in the chat in a moment. But enough of that. focus on Brian now. So Brian works at University College London's Centre for Research in Autism Education, and he's currently working on a funded project entitled Superior Perceptual Capacity in Autism. He completed his PhD in specialist autism mentoring in UK higher education at ASA, and that's the University of Birmingham's Autism Centre for Education and Research. He's also provided mentoring, specialist mentoring himself at Royal Holloway at the University of London, and was previously head of philosophy and religious education at a secondary modern school. So a huge amount of professional and research experience. So we are absolutely delighted to welcome Brian Irvine tonight. And over to you, Brian. Thank you very much.
It's a real joy to be here, and just a warm welcome to all of you who've come to join us. It's one of those autumnal nights where it's getting a little bit dark outside, and I almost kind of want to get the blanket to wrap around myself just as I sort of settle down to this. I'm just going to bring up slides. There we go. Hopefully, and Joe, if you can give me a thumbs up, is my slide and just my slide there? Checking. Oh.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, everything just froze there and I had a little moment. Oh, if that happens, I'll just keep continuing talking and hopefully it will record well. So I'm Brian. If you want to, you can use the QR code to go to my link tree and there look for the tomato of wisdom. Believe me, it will make sense when you see it and once we've talked about it, or it might not. As Joe said, I'm a researcher on the Superior Perceptual Capacity in Autism project, which a short version is autistic folk can hear more, see more and sense more, and so create wonderful, deep, rich versions of the world that sometimes can turn to rumination, but sometimes can find more beauty in the world. So that's my research time. Before that, I was doing research on specialist autism mentoring. I've been a mentor for 12 years now, which is quite some time. Actually, before that, and between that and the sort of head of philosophy and religious education, I was a childminder for a while. And I want to say that. So actually, I've got this background, which isn't just sort of formal education kind of block by blocks. I stayed at home and looked after 5 under 5s for 5 years, dressed up as a pirate. It was the best job in the world. And I don't like the sort of hierarchy that's sometimes given to in education. So yeah, to anyone who's a childminder out there, you are doing the best job and I kind of miss it. For those of you who are tuned in but are not using the screen, because I know evening lectures like this, it's really nice. Sometimes if you're doing the washing up, if maybe you're sitting outside with a nice fire going and some marshmallows, maybe that's a bit whimsy. But if you're doing that kind of thing, sometimes it's nice just to listen. So if you're just listening in, I'm a bespectacled bearded man with a passing resemblance to Santa. Mentoring is what I do. It's what happened at the higher educations that I worked at. It is backstage. People don't come and see what you do when you're mentoring quite often. I think it's a pathway to understanding, to, dare I say it, wisdom, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And if not wisdom itself, I have the humility to say it's at least a passing facsimile of wisdom. And sometimes we need wise people in our life who may not actually be wise, so we develop our own wisdom. And sometimes maybe that's what we're doing. But before we go any further, a quick arc. I'm going to do a little bit about, we'll talk about our aims first. Then we're going to talk about some numbers of students in higher education. We're going to go to concepts of, well, how I did the research, autistic hypothesizers. I might talk at some point about the difference between mentoring, teaching and coaching. Hopefully we'll get time to talk about knowledge and operational reframing. Then I hope towards the end to get to 3 elements of reframing that if you are mentoring in whatever circumstance you find yourself at, whether it's formally, maybe at a university or maybe at work, or whether it's that informal mentoring that we all do, which goes throughout education. I'm going to talk about 3 particular elements that I would like you to think about when you're in that role. So first of all, because I was a teacher for so long, hopefully you can now see my aims up there. The aim for this is I hope you will know a little bit more about specialist mentoring that happens for autistic and ADHD students in our UK universities. I then want you to reframe mentoring as a process of reframing. And hopefully that will give you a model to think about when it comes to mentoring itself. To do that, we're going to talk about what mentoring is. We're going to talk about accommodations and supports, going to talk a bit about participatory research and looking at the right thing. So this is where I will disclose I am what's called an aphant. My brain, I worked out, works differently from the majority about the age of 12. I have once had a picture in my head, and that's because I was having a huge temperature from COVID and I saw a rotating square inside my mind's eye. How do you lot live with stuff inside your heads? It's horrid. It just fills it all up. So I have a blank brain. Sometimes what really freaks people out, I have very little internal monologue. And some people have pointed out it's all external. So I'm from a different neurotype. It's still slightly marginalized, I know, particularly with ideas about memories. So for me, the past is very, very vague. I can't see it. I can't visualize it. So suddenly coming across the fact that people would live with ideas that were clear and concrete about their past, rather than, as I thought until my mid-teens, everybody was just making everything up as they went along. It is that kind of othering that is passed upon us. So I'm not, well, I think I share some stars of the autism, what do you call it? Constellation. I have some of the autistic stars. I've definitely got a few of the ADHD stars. I've got a lot of stars about memory in my constellation, in my little star sign of neurodivergence. Because of that, I have worked alongside autistic hypothesizers and autistic master mentors to create this research. It's not me, it's not my thoughts, it's my thoughts wandering around with other people and taking the lead from other people. And I'll tell you how that all came together in a bit. Finally, in the outline, we're going to talk about big domains of what mentors do, and we're going to talk about this whole idea of reframing. I hope that makes sense. Settle yourself back. This is a lovely journey. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as the story I get to tell. Starting off with a graph, because it wouldn't be science without a proper graph. This is the number of autistic students in UK universities. What we can say is there's a lot more autistic students that are at our universities than there used to be. Who can say education has got better, identification's better. There is definitely from, I would say, about 2015, an ownership of their autistic identity of a lot of the students that I met. The first time I saw and please excuse me for the profanity in this, the I'm autistic fuck off t-shirt was just amazing. It was somebody owning their own identity and not kowtowing to anyone else. So we've had this cultural change as well as an educational change. To give you a rough idea, in 2022, which is the last time that HESA has the figures for, there were 19,565 autistic university students in the entire of the UK. That is about 1,000 more students than are at Reading. Imagine the Reading campus as an autistic utopia, where all the autistic students from the UK flocked together, and then there's more. That is quite a sizable number. And because of that, we can say autistic students belong in our higher education. There's no ifs or buts. It's no coming in, they're already here. And the support that they've been given for the last 10 or 15 years has been something called specialist mentoring. Now, I saw that there were a few specialist mentors in the chat on the way in. That this next bit, please gloss over, go get yourself a cup of tea. This is for people who don't know what specialist mentoring is. At university, it's been the chief support since probably about 2011 or so. There are two kinds of specialist mentors. There's autism specialist mentors, who are now also autism and ADHD specialist mentors, as from about a year ago. And there are mental health specialist mentors. We are slightly different, though I did ask Student Finance England if they knew the difference between the two and how many was doing what in a Freedom of Information request 3 years ago, and they didn't know. So they do sometimes stick us together as a pile, but they are two radically different provisions. I think it's something to do with the mental health mentors' lauded aims to minimize relapse. And you can't minimize relapse of being autistic. You're autistic through and through, and it's awesome. So there are two different approaches going on. This is all paid for by the Disabled Students Allowance. So if you are going to university, or if you're talking to people going to university, when they go for their student loan, there's a little box that you tick, and it says, I'm autistic, or ADHD. And if you tick that on the student loans application, you'll get some more paperwork through, and there's always paperwork, and you'll fill in the paperwork and send off it back to student loans, and student loans will say, oh, could you go and see an assessor? And you'll go and see an assessor, and most of the time the assessor will say what you could really benefit from at university is a specialist autism mentor like Brian, or one of the 1,130 is my guess this year, specialist mentors that work in the UK. There's quite a few of us. About 55% of autistic folk take up this mentoring provision themselves. So it's not universal. It could be, and I've had conversations where students just say, no, I've got this. I'm just so glad to be out of school. I don't need any more support. I just don't need other kids being around that I grew up with, because frankly they're a bunch of morons. And it's kind of, oh, use what's your language, and there's that kind of, I need to escape the place that I've grown up with. There are some, I reckon, at least 15% of students who don't know that it exists, of autistic students, and that's a sort of sad moment to me. There actually should be something out there to make this a little bit better. The funding you get, it may come through the student loan system, but it is not a loan. It is given to you to support your stuff, your way through. I also think that there is something very interesting about, I sometimes think of it as the cult of independence when I talk to sixth formers, that they are so wanting to be independent that they don't realise that at university we're intradependent, that actually as lecturers, as students, as teachers, as people together, we kind of need each other, that we're not our own islands. And maybe that's got something to say, that, you know, that there's almost a, you have to be independent, you have to be living independently. And that mantra that they get throughout school can sometimes make reaching out for support a bit more trickier, when actually we were saying, we were saying we're all in this together, then maybe we've got something else going on. So mentoring itself, usually, and for about a decade or so, I met most students for an hour every week. There are some students that I've met for 2 hours in a week, and we would sit down and, if we're honest, have a cup of tea and talk about life, the universe, and everything. It is one of those things that students in, so the work by Lucas and James in 2018, they said they found it valuable for course persistence. So technical way of saying, actually with a mentor, they go through to the next year. They then go through to pass. They then go through to graduate. They credit the mentoring for that. Whether it is the mentoring, I'm not sure. I'll think about it some other time. But the big statistic to frame all this in is that 85% of autistic students do complete their studies. That is 84% compared to the 85% of the majority, or 79% of students who disclose a mental health need. Our autistic students quite often have issues when they struggle with their mental health as well, but they're completing at a higher rate than just students who come to see mentors for mental health reasons. It could be because mentoring is a good thing. It could be other factors. There is something very joyous about autistic persistence. With the students I've worked with, those who will say, no, this isn't going to crush me. I'm going to get our way through. So I don't want to credit it all to mentoring. It has its role to play in the greater web of this. Now, with the growth of numbers of students, with the good rates of completion, I'd like to introduce you to a framework for reframing that might underpin what we do as specialist autism mentors, but also what you might do in mentoring in different places. And it doesn't have to be a neurodivergent mentoring at all. It's that good mentoring practice that, because of the perspicuity, because of the detail that the autistic folk that I've worked alongside, because of what they see, has informed, structured, given me this model, which I can then hopefully give back to a wider set of mentors. First of all, we do have to consider, though, tomatoes. Okay. Now, I can only see Joe's face here. It's brilliant. Everybody goes, yeah. Okay, so I want you to think about knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is actually a fruit. Wisdom is knowing it does not get chopped up and used in a fruit salad, ever. Knowledge and wisdom are two separate things. They are deeply interrelated in how we actually approach stuff. But knowing stuff and knowing what to do with that knowledge are two things that we need to consider independently. A rounded education needs both the knowledge of the mysteries of your subject and the wisdom of how to apply your subject to the world. Teaching, I would say, tends towards knowledge, while mentoring tends towards wisdom. I don't think it's a binary system. There's also coaching that hangs around about the process of doing a subject. In the sort of tomato metaphor, it's about the skill of wielding the knife properly. They're deeply interrelated, which is why I'm going to spend hopefully no more than a few minutes talking a little bit about the history of teaching, coaching and mentoring and how it comes together. I've got three major images up here. I've got the sort of brown one, which is this kind of side. That's Confucius. Confucius teaching and passing on knowledge. The sort of pencil drawing along the bottom, that is, I'll talk about William Hopkins in a bit. That is one of the first coaches at Cambridge University. Coaching as an idea started in an academic sense, which gives me an awful lot of joy as somebody who works at universities, that we have these different traditions that we can pull from. And lastly, we have a picture which is from it's Andrew Jackson, who was an old president of the United States. He made a place called the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, and he had this beautiful wallpaper made for the entire thing. And this wallpaper told various scenes that came from myths. And at the top, we have the original Mentor. I'll talk about Mentor in a second. What Mentor is doing is throwing Telemachus into the ocean to escape the naughty nymphs downstairs. And I will tell you a little bit more how this plays together, how we can think about mentoring in just a moment. But we'll start with Confucius, because a great way of thinking about the replication of knowledge that is teaching. Teaching goes back before Confucius. It's always been there in teaching, has always been there in written texts, because somebody taught somebody how to write. There is that Platonic school of wandering through fields, having a good old chat about life, but it's the tradition of Confucius that's probably had the biggest impact on what teaching is. It's that passing down of knowledge, becoming a master of knowledge, and in some ways imitating your teacher as that font of knowledge. Sometimes, but not always, and particularly since I was at school, we're now no longer sat in rows and writing. I would like to say teaching is about the love of knowledge. And I was having a think, actually, this is completely unprepared. Just as I was walking home to present this, there is the flip side of teaching, so teaching that love of knowledge, actually researchers take that love to an extreme when they work in spaces where there isn't knowledge. So researchers as an extreme form of teaching, it's that love of knowledge when we work with no knowledge. I could be wrong on this idea. Coaching, down the bottom, that's the latecomer. It arose in about the 18th century in the halls of Cambridge University. So, traditional university lecturers didn't really want to teach, and students didn't really want to learn, and they tried to avoid each other by not going to the same coffee shops or pubs. Everything's changed, hasn't it? But it did mean that because all the students back then were wealthy and privileged, all were wealthy and privileged, because they were a bunch of poshos, they needed to pass their exams. And so they started throwing money at this new group of people who were the coaches, who, like a horse pulls a coach, the coach would pull you through your exam, carry you through your exam. And the original concept that we get of coaching before it gets picked up by sport and business is actually that people to carry you through examinations. There are times in all our jobs where we do sort of move between these roles. It's fascinating that the guy that you can see sort of on his knees in the picture, if you can zoom in, that's William Hopkins, who by all accounts was a coach by telling long rambling stories to make his students fall in love with this problem solving in maths. Just for those of you who like this kind of stuff, the top maths student in Cambridge is called the Senior Wrangler. I kid you not, it's a great name. And William Hopkins was so good, he was given the title of Senior Wrangler Maker. That is just a great name to be given. It's because he was a coach that was about the love of skills, the love of process. And actually, the love of skills and love of process, just like with teaching, I said, in love of knowledge, actually, if you take away the knowledge, that becomes research. Likewise, with coaching, the love of process, the love of the skills, if you take that away and you use the skills without thinking about it, you've almost got art. So that there's a sort of flip side. This is a very new thought for me as I was coming up a hill today. So on to mentoring, which I'm going to talk a lot about for the rest of it. Mentor in, so for those of you who like your Greek myths, Mentor was in Homer's Odyssey, and he left to help Telemachus, was left behind to help Telemachus, Odysseus's son. The spirit of Athena, the spirit of wisdom, possessed Mentor 3 times in the Odyssey. Athena, the spirit of wisdom, also possesses seagulls at one point, and I think there's definitely thing. Basically, as a mentor, I'm worth about 3 seagulls. If I'm really honest, I squawk a bit, I eat chips. 3 seagulls in a very vaguely human trench coat. In the 16th century, a lovely mystic called Fenelon wrote some fanfic about Telemachus and Mentor and their own escapades. And this is where this picture is from, escaping from the naughty nymphs. This is really where we get the idea of mentoring from, as support, care, wise counsel. It models a fairly egotistical young man growing into becoming the model ruler. And you do this by chucking them off of cliffs. It's not nice, it's adventurous, it's not always polite. There is a little bit in the original ideas of what mentoring is, which is a little bit about taking risks and actually allowing that humility of being a risk taker to create what Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet, says that the mentor helped Telemachus to grow into offices of tenderness. So this isn't about being a ruler with sort of power and authority and coming down. This is about being able to be that vulnerable position of being a very good leader. And that's entwined with the original idea of what mentoring is. It's personal growth. Now, mentoring itself re-emerges again in the 20th century via the self-help movements of the 70s. But very, very quickly became shackled to developing skills in the workplace. So the 80s saw mentoring move from business itself, that kind of, here's my young protege, come, I will teach you how to run the business kind of stuff, into how we train nurses and doctors and teachers. So in the 90s, the language of mentoring for me becoming a teacher was really part of it. But the 90s themselves saw mentoring morph into something else. It came from the corporate world into this sort of skills-based world, and then it became commandeered as a tool for justice, particularly because it straddled the marginalization of women, and the marginalisation of race through a concern for building a self-efficacy, for building confidence in the mentee that was working, or the protege. I tried to move away from the word protege because there are business connotations about sameness and exploitation, which I'm never quite sure about. But the naughties, I think that's what we call the zeros, that the pendulum swings back to the individual mentoring for personal development and change, especially in things like youth mentoring. There's an awful lot of that going on in the naughties. One of the big models of mentoring that emerged is it's by Galbraith and Cohen, and it's the complete mentor model. Now, I have a problem with this because it's the complete mentor model, not the complete mentee model. So when I was a mentor, I'd come across these different ways of being mentoring. I decided to try and find a little bit better about shifting what it was. So this is the methodology bit. I mean, do zone out for this. I worked, first of all, there was a systematic review, the literature beforehand. I had 14 mentees right at the beginning who developed questions that I could ask mentors. It's really hard going into a PhD and telling a sort of funding body, I don't know what I'm studying because I haven't asked the right questions to know what I'm studying, which is why I had to self-fund the first year. But once I got the questions, the funding happened. And there is something systematic, I think, about our autism research, where actually we don't know the right questions to be asking yet. And so sometimes we do have to take the risk to get in. So I had this panel of mentees develop the questions and to actually keep their diaries alongside the mentor diaries. So as you can see, if you can't zoom in, there's just lots and lots of cogs that came together. They helped me create the way to submit for 42 mentors to submit their diaries over a period of a year. Of those mentors, about a third were autistic, a third were, like myself, other neurodivergences, and a third I think we'll call allied. These mentors themselves, they were over that year were seeing 330 mentees, and they wrote 583 diary entries that I sat and was very thankful that COVID hit because it gave me time to code it all. So I was starting off with the codes. I thought, oh, what am I doing imposing my own codes upon this? So I then reached out and I put together a group of 5 master mentors. I read through lots of these diaries and I found things that just amazing people who one of them, and this was just early weeks of lockdown, their student was suddenly, I can't do the biology dissections of owl pellets that I thought I could do. And so the mentor did a little bit of research, was working with their mentee, reached out to the local owl sanctuary and got permission for the student to go and pick up their own little owl pellets that they could sort of pull apart. And even if they couldn't do it as part of the lectures anymore, they could do it part of the mentoring system. That joy in a special interest that could be shared by someone who could just say, yeah, go do it. That almost implicit permission of going on. And they became one of my 5 master mentors. I had a plan that I was going to recruit 5, and then I would then make sure that I was recruiting more so that actually we had an autistic majority. I didn't need it. Going through master mentors, 4 of the 5 master mentors were autistic themselves. So I had this beautiful group that could guide me and talk me through whether things were going in the right direction, what kind of ideas were happening. One of the things that that they passed back to me was the idea, just to sort of make the bigger frame for this, of mentoring as being something backstage. So when mentoring happens, it doesn't happen in front of an audience. It doesn't happen in front of 30 other kids. It happens, the mentor and the mentee backstage. And this came out of the master mentors. Claire themselves was a master mentor. It's this idea about reframing. It's about these conversations where we reframe the student's experience of themselves, which can too often be as failing. And that failing is because they're trying to bring themselves to a normative standard rather than being their own glorious selves. So we invite them to look at these different things. We get them to think about values, about how awesome they are. Just these groups, well, we were talking so much, and we're using words like brilliant and awesome and fantastic. And it was just that wonderful joy of people being seen. And if you're seen, maybe you can step away from punishing yourself, particularly if school's been a really, really hard time for you. So this from mentors, actually, what I really should do is I should sort of segue and tell you some of the questions the mentees brought up for the mentors to have. Things like, do you actually understand us, or do you just listen? And that was actually the opening question that I dropped on all the mentors. Actually, what is going on in the mentoring session? This is about double empathy probing. So I'll give you a quick sort of word picture of it all. Student arrives at a mentoring session. They're looking a little stressed. So first of all, you've just come in from the corridor. Should I assume that the corridor was stressful? I don't know. I really don't know. So I'm going to ask. And they tell me with their stressed face on that they've just received their first. And I go, this is just brilliant. Congratulations. But I'm still getting this sort of sense of stress coming off you. And then it transpires that actually it's a worry that if they tell their mum about their first, she'll do that terrible loop things that some mums do, where it's, oh, you got a first. Oh, you got a first. Oh, my student. Yeah, you're my daughter. You got your first. And remember that essay, and it's coming back to it again and again. And there's that feeling that the student then started talking about being exposed, about the layers of expectation. But it's still a first. So, well, we then go on, but because I'd almost misunderstood the situation from the first, I thought a first was a joyous thing. But, and this is where we'll sort of come to things later. I started pulling on various different other bits as a mentor. Actually, I said, perhaps, maybe you don't have to have this chat about this first with your mum straight away. I know with your mum, you've been thinking about maybe moving into halls. Perhaps, when you're talking about this negotiator moving into halls with friends, that's when you drop the fact that you got a first. And it allows you to then do that kind of thing. Stu's going, oh, this wasn't a new strategy from me. This was actually something that a student that I'd worked with a year before had done. I was just passing strategies to strategies. So it was first of all trying to understand. It was then passing on strategies. And then I had to say, look, I'm really, really proud of you for getting a first. I've got you. Yeah, I'll be the one that goes way. And I know you don't want it, but I'll say hey once and then I'll move on. And I did. It was that having that support, that back. So that all comes from, I think, this first question, which is about double empathy. The nice bit is the mentors wrote back, and there is this beautiful bit about humility of sometimes I understand, sometimes I just try. Knowing that we don't know. I mean, I have issues with my memory. I'm very good at not knowing because things just disappear. But this, sometimes I understand and sometimes just trying, is about taking that first step between the double empathy problem. It is a problem, but problems have solutions. Problems have bridges. Problems have ways forward. There is these things that maybe mentors with your long experience, hopefully you've got a theoretical understanding of autism and you're keeping that up to date. You've got professional experience, as I had, of other students where I could sort of bring things around. There's also that ability to know when you're being a mentor and knowing when you're being a person. I mean, lots of the long-serving mentors, they discuss the tension between becoming inured to hearing again and again about the daily challenges of autistic students. If you're working in a university, you will have the same handful of issues will come up on a regular basis, and sometimes that can grind you down. But if you're ground down, you're not going to be the good mentor you can be. So you've got to have that ability to process the full impact that these herd challenges have on yourself as an individual. So I used self-elected pseudonyms throughout that, and that full impact of challenges that they have on any one individual. How we have that appreciation comes from the wonderful mentor that was named Nat Sav. It made me giggle every time I typed it. You do this, there's active listening, there's extending empathy. Lady Bigfoot, another great name, she spoke of bespoke and evidence-based support. That there is this kind of idea that we should be going back to evidence. And if there isn't evidence, then we actually sort of create stuff around the student that we know. But there is in this statement something about bold humility. Autistic or allied alike, we need to know first that we don't know. The mentoring relationship that emerges from that not knowing then becomes a template for other great relationships. That negotiated relationship that unfurls backstage from the hurly-burly, in which two people meet and misunderstand in such a way that understanding can be forged. I think there's a big idea that goes on at it backstage for that kind of stuff. So we have to be humble. We have to be fearless in the way we approach it. There has to be that certain amount of bravery, of vulnerability. So those were the big overarching ideas. Actually, boiling it down, I'm going to talk about three different domains. Operational, I'm going to zoom into these in a second. Knowledge of the experiences of students, and the art and craft itself of reframing. First of all, this was called the Pokeball of practicality. That in the middle, if we're doing things, it's whatever is needed at the time, and then how we get what is needed at the time onto the next thing. So if a student comes to us in crisis, that is needed to be addressed, but we also need to bridge it to a time of not crisis. If a student is coming in the last part of their university years, then actually we should be thinking about bridging onto work, about finding a fulfilling way of living. To do this, we have to have these safe spaces. We have to do something that's a bit more than listening with our understanding. That the mentors themselves have to have the character. T.S. Eliot, second bit of poetry. The only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless. There is that thing that knowing we don't know, actually, as people, actually having that humility to say, I don't know, let's talk about it. Having that resilience to hold the space for other people is a part of what we should be as mentors. If you, I'll do the QR link at the end. That, just thinking that on the QR thing, there is a list of something like 72 things that as a mentor, you've got to get your head around at some point in your career. It's really, really useful. It comes from many mentors. I'll share that with you later. There's the last thing before I move on is the appreciation of heterogeneity. Actually, as one put it, I love the difference in all the students that I meet. I think it was Claire again. The meeting of so many different kinds of people is a beautiful thing. As mentors, we also need to have the knowledge of what's going on in a student's life. Interesting that because these bubbles are the number of times that students were talking, mentors were talking about stuff. One of the big bubbles that gets talked about is the lack of understanding from staff. Whatever situation you're in, one of the things that you have to do is to talk about how the fact that actually some staff are not up to scratch. They should be, and in an ideal world they would be, but at the moment we are walking towards the promised land. We haven't quite reached it yet. So it is talking about how some other staff are wrong, and that's a hard thing to do if you're in a precarious contract, and also without being gossipy about it, because we don't like that kind of stuff. It doesn't work well. On the thriving, one of the things that came up an awful lot, the little yellow one, is thriving remotely. And actually, there has been a return to in-person education. Whether that, the fact that we can do things like this, whether that's now missing, I think it depends. I think it's geographic. There are lots of things we need to know the way around students. That's an entire lecture in its own right. What I really want to do is to talk about the art of mentoring by reframing. A great mentor, in fact, a good enough mentor, will do three things during a mentoring session, almost without fail. They will seek to identify the joys and issues. What's brilliant? What's amazing? What's great in your life? What sucks? They will be doing this, well, I called that diagnostic, but it's not diagnosing the individual, it's diagnosing the world. I wanted to flip the whole medical model when I did this. So it is working with your students to diagnose the ills of the world and the joys of the world, to become sociologists in their own right, critical of the institutions that they're part of. So this isn't going to be mentoring that gets people to fit institutions. This is creating advocates. The second bit is the mentor and the mentee together will come up with strategies to fix the things that don't seem right. The student themselves has a wealth of experience of being themselves. The mentor has an experience of other mentees who may have gone through something similar that can inform the thinking. This is prognostic. In medical terms, a prognosis, the hidden knowledge, prognosis, is working out what's going to happen next. And a prognosis is how things play out. If you're flipping that, you're looking at how things are going to play out in the world. So diagnosis, prognosis. And then lastly, they do this motivational thing. It's the only thing that really sits with the mentor. We act as kindly cheerleaders. And I don't mean, with big rah-rah kind of things, because that's too in your face. It's that gentleness of saying, I've got your back again and again. Give it a go, give it a whirl. When it goes pear-shaped, I'll be here for you. If it doesn't go pear-shaped, I will be celebrating. I'll be celebrating with you. So going a little bit further into these. Diagnosis. One of the things that the mentors were talking about, particularly the autism mentors, was that idea of neurodiverse frame alignment. This is getting the idea of the neurodiversity paradigm and passing it on. And actually, when students arrive, this whole idea that humanity has many minds and we are one set of minds, and actually we need all these minds working together to solve some of the big problems of the world. Getting across that philosophy to the students actually help them grow in their sense of self-identity. So that was a big one. There was naming structural injustices. There is nothing better, excuse language, of having a good old bitch about what universities are. And it is very, very therapeutic. Don't get stuck there. It's the first step, but you have to be able to say, these are the things that are wrong with how we do education. There's the processing of anxieties, that kind of coming back and doing the hard work of saying, this is what I'm worried about. What I think is really cool with a lot of this kind of stuff. It's not about the anxieties itself. It's about talking them through, flipping them over. It's not about the injustices itself. It's naming them and moving on. It's about this first step towards becoming true advocates with the students that we work with. The next step, the prognostic step, mainly collaborative stuff about working together to pass things on from student to student in a kind and caring way. There's also, and this is an important one, developing social understanding. It's not social skills. Over the years that I've had, the number of students that have come to me who have had social skill classes at school, and they need to junk an awful lot of it because it's not appropriate for students. When a student comes to you and say, Brian, when's the right time to swear? Because everybody around me is doing this, and it's kind of, well, did they teach you not to swear at school? Yeah. It's not right that there are the right places for doing this, and it's sort of working it through together. So it's the understanding rather than the skills, and that kind of really works. There's also liaising with universities. Sometimes there will be barriers, pockets of resistance. There's some interesting research that was done on nurses in the 1980s that actually one of the when it comes to change and resistance and sometimes being slow to get stuff done, it might be seated in the practitioner's guilt that they've not been able to do stuff well beforehand, which is why in universities there is sometimes a guilt that we haven't served our students well, and sometimes that can create these pockets of slowness and change, and sometimes where students are also put under one banner rather than individuals. Just bearing in mind that when we're bringing around change, we've got to bring people with us for it, particularly our departmental officers, particularly our elderly academics who don't want to do change. Well, if we can bring them with us, we're going in the right direction. Lastly, there's this bit about motivation. More than anything else, it's about sharing joy. If there is something amazing, then we celebrate. I had some party streamers in my sort of mentoring kit that would just go off. Sometimes it's about speaking about people's virtues, speaking about what is brilliant about this person that you're sitting with. Sometimes it's this passion for special interests. I love me an infodump. I would happily, in an hour-long session, be 15 minutes, 45 minutes. Tell me about the thing that brings you joy, because it brings you joy and no other reason. And actually, this is a space where this can happen, and that has a beautiful therapeutic effect in its own right. The thing is, this diagnostic prognostic motivational model, I know as a sociologist, comes from something which is called frame alignment. It's how groups like Greenpeace, the suffragettes, Black Lives Matter, also on the other side, it's how groups like NIMBYism and other grumpy people all get together to create momentum and movement. And what mentors are doing is, I think at the moment, they are promoting the neurodiversity paradigm within our institutions. I don't think mentoring is linked to neurodiversity paradigm, but I think that's what they're doing. So they're actually bringing around institutional change by the way that they're doing things. And the way that they do things, and lovely Lady Bookfoot, I'm going to end with her quote, is we have this attitude of everything can be sorted, along with positivity and acceptance and love of all things different. I think that's a beautiful and wonderful way of doing it. I'm going to put up the link tree again. There are more things. You can hear me rambling about mentoring in other ways. Also, hopefully, the Neuro Mentoring podcast is going to be coming out in December, where you can hear me and my wonderful colleague Lucy from Bridge Mentoring. I think we've got about 13 hours of talking about this recorded. It's quite terrifying. Joe, come and join me.
That was great, Brian. Thank you so much. You know what? When I woke up this morning, I didn't have. Who knew that I was going to be racking my brains back to the Odyssey to work out?
It is, and actually, it's these concepts that we have of developing and growing into our own humanity. I think it actually mining the mythological past, the historical past, for different ways of how it's been done before, particularly the industrial era, when we had to be little cogs in a big wheel to make machinery and business happen. I think it's a good antidote to some of that, and it can actually inspire us to go different ways. Can I just give a quick call out to Luke Pomeroy as the fearless Mr. Blobby being a hero? It's just so as somebody who can get a bit excitable at times, my personal fearless mentor, not mentor, hero, there's the best word, is Mr. Tumble. Oh, I love me a Mr. Tumble. There is something, and actually, I was talking about the reflections of. So you've got teaching, and the reflection of teaching is research, because it's this love of knowing, but you don't know anything, and this love of process, but without using process becomes art. Interesting. I think the reflection of mentoring, for me, is sometimes foolishness, and there is something about clowning. There is something about comedy. There is something about that humility of putting aside that pompous wisdom and just being a little bit more open, that actually helps helps ideas ferment and fluff. But there you go, maybe I overthink things.
Not at all. In fact, while we do have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm just going to give people a bit longer to post their question if they have one. But while they do that, I just wondered if I could pick
Somebody's
up on
just
that.
said Mr. Tumble is from Reading.
Oh yeah,
I've got a new stalking thing to do.
He also has an honorary degree from the University of Reading, I think, as well.
Oh!
Yeah, he's one.
Oh,
I think.
Oh, we need him in. Justin Fletcher is an absolute star.
He's one of our own.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really quite jealous.
But yeah, something that I thought was really powerful was I think the phrase that you used was bold humility. I think that was an incredibly powerful phrase. And I just wanted to ask for your thoughts on, how we embody that, because I think so many of us who work with students, any kind of student, but particularly students who may be experiencing difficulties, how do we move away from that kind of very strong kind of compulsion to want to solve problems and fix things for, how do we move away from that being our metric of success, and towards that idea of, we don't have to have all the answers. What we're doing here within this relationship is important, and it isn't reliant on us fixing anything or solving anything. How do we move away from that?
Okay, weirdly, I'm going to go down the line of the Navy SEALs. Okay, so we've gone from mentoring and naughty nymphs. We've gone via lots of other things. We're going to go to Navy SEALs next. The Navy SEALs have a phrase which is self-knowledge is the backbone of humility. And this whole idea that we can only be people who create space for others if we know who we are. And if we know who we are and we become that solid person who knows deep down that we know very little, and if we can embody that as a strength, then the people that we work with will actually start responding, and they will start growing their own, I hate the phrase growing a backbone, but they'll grow their own humility. And that will become from that self-knowledge. That self-knowledge itself then leads on to creating powerful advocates. Advocates who aren't just shouting about themselves, but shouting about their not knowing. That robust humility that comes from self-knowledge, of knowing that actually there are probably many ways of getting through things, but actually things still need to change. And it gives you that almost frictionless, or at least less friction way of becoming an advocate. When we say, look, we're all wrong, let's go and fix this together. And that means that actually those people, particularly those people in power, can come along with you. And they don't lose face, and they don't have to do that stuff. So it's quite a powerful way of doing things. And the process that goes on in mentoring, that sort of diagnosis of the world, that prognosis of how things are going to happen in the future, and that motivational thing, that then fires up what we are doing with these young advocates that we are having the privilege to foster.
Nice words.
Oh, as an off-the-cuff answer, that's not bad.
I'm just wondering, because I know there'll be people here tonight who support autistic students in university, but are not mentors in the official sense, if that makes sense. So they may be academic tutors, they may be module conveners, they may be dissertation supervisors, they may be so occupying a kind of not a general mentoring role, but maybe a specifically kind of academically focused one. What advice would you have for them in within this kind of bold humility framework? Because actually for many students, to say you don't know is not the answer they want from somebody who's potentially going to be somebody who you would hope would be in a position of not knowing the answer. So how does somebody who's doing informal mentoring occupy that tension between those two positions?
It's that difference between I don't know and we don't know. So actually, there is a position of responsibility that we have, particularly if we are experts in our field, to be able to say some sort of answer for those who are desperate for an answer, because sometimes there isn't enough capacity to develop wisdom the long way around. And sometimes you have to go straight for knowledge, bang, 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 replicate the master, that'll do. But actually, if we're aiming for this sort of mentoring side, which goes alongside teaching and coaching. I love that coaching, just grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and pulling them through. And these are all the answers. Go, 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 done. Do the process. Love the process. But the long form of wisdom that we're hoping to put in, it may not be appropriate at a time. But if it is appropriate, if there is capacity, you say, we don't know together. Let's work it out together. Let's bounce backwards and forwards, both at a place of mutual misunderstanding, until we find something that we can actually build upon. So it's we don't know, not I don't know. Hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Andrew
Sorry,
just put
somebody's
in
just
the
said
chat.
in return that I usually signpost to Joe Billington.
I don't know if they're signposting to me. I think they
Yeah.
may be saying that they use signposting. I hope they're saying they use
Oh, okay.
signposting.
I usually signpost past people. No, I usually signpost to Joe Billington, which I was doing. Though that's in the entire context of singing in panto, so I could have just been completely.
I know the whole chat has gone off on a Mr. Tumble
Oh, it's brilliant,
sidebar.
as it should. All hail Justin Fletcher.
Okay, so I'm now going to go to the questions that have been posed by members of our audience tonight. So thank you for those of you who posted them. First is from Sarah, who's looking for some advice, not on university mentoring, but on mentoring that might come in at an earlier stage. I don't know if this is something you can comment on, Brian, but for an 18, 19-year-old who's actually still in college as opposed to university, because they're redoing a couple of years, and they have an education, health and care plan. Mm-hmm. And Sarah's wondering, how might mentoring be put in place earlier in the education kind of hierarchy rather than simply just
if you want to reach out, there are some lovely autistic-led mentoring companies like Spectrum First and Bridge Mentoring, who do a little bit of sixth form mentoring, a little bit of further education mentoring as well. They're brilliant. The main question is, it becomes part of the system. It becomes, how do we get it paid for? If you have the resources to do it yourself, if you think it'll be helpful, worth a punt. If it's something worth reaching out to, I don't particularly work with local authorities at the moment, but you might find something via that rather than doing the stuff. And also, don't underestimate the informal mentoring. One of the students I was working with about 7 or 8 years ago, 2 years into these wonderful rambling conversations we had, and he just goes, Brian, I love doing this because you remind me of when my godfather was with us, because he would have these big, long conversations about life, the universe, and everything with me. So it doesn't have to be that sort of formal one. There can be that sort of informal mentoring that we build on, and it's finding the people. I will say, I don't think parents are ever the right people, because there is something in the relationship which, as a parent, you never want to see your child getting into trouble. As a mentor, I love my mentees getting into trouble, because then they learn how to get out of it. Yeah.
It's a relief. As a parent, it's a relief to hear that, Brian.
It is. And the fact that there are now 1,130 mentors in the UK who are really quite good at turning up with mentees at things like a university, what do you call it? Disciplinary committees. And if you're lucky, you'll get a mentor like me who had to go to university disciplinary committees when he was a student, because I may have set fire to some stuff in a hall because tea towels. The tea towels had bacteria in. It smelt a bit funky. I may have had a few pints. I put it in just to kill into the microwave, just to kill the bacteria in the tea towels. But I hit the grill button and filled the entire hall full of white smoke. Being a nightmare student actually has helped me be a good mentor, because I've seen, I've seen I know what it's like when the teeth are out to get you. There you go.
Thank you. Could you message a question here from Liz? Please, could you tell us a bit more about how specialist HE autism mentors are trained? Thank you.
They're not. No, that they are. So I would say, I don't think I'd be wrong to say, actually, we may be approaching half of specialist autism mentors themselves in the UK. If I'm being optimistic, we're getting close to those numbers. So their training is an autistic life well lived. Okay. On top of that, the actual training itself is, I wouldn't say minimal, it's good. You have to at least have a degree. You have had to have gone through what the students are going through themselves. So whichever neurotype you hail from, there's actually that, you've got to have been there. You've got to have done the story. You then, if your degree is in something vaguely related to education or psychology, it's a little bit easier. You have to do less courses. If it's not, then the courses. But the courses themselves, usually run by the National Autistic Society. It's usually a 2 days worth of courses. It's making sure you know what double empathy is. Then that's probably it, which is why I started doing research in it. And so if you follow the link tree, there is a 1 A4 page of fairly small text of all the things you might want to get your heads around if you're a beginning mentor, if you're fairly established, or if you're becoming a master mentor. And you can chart your own way through it to find out the things that you need. And hopefully that'll point you in the right direction. But one of the things I hail back to in the research, as a lot was talking about the mentor's character. So how do we train people for character? I'm not sure we're doing that. Hopefully we're the right kind of people that as mentors, what we do, well, I meet quite a few of them. They're a bunch of anarchists. It's brilliant. They are the ones that are agitating systems. They're the ones that have sat with stories of things going wrong within universities and have sat there without it, well, through it all with those students, without stepping away from it. It's that lovely experience-led development. But you get that catch-22. Where do you get that from to start with? Interestingly, about half of the mentors that I talk to have a background in counselling of some description, and about 30% of us used to be teachers at some point. So there is, that professional shift, which is quite nice. The downside to it is it's still 0-hour contract in most places. I know a few universities which now have contracted mentors, so they're there all the time, usually a caseload of about 25 to 27 students in a week, but they're there for students who also don't have the official DSA funding for it, so they can pick up that. In fact, big shout out to King's College London, who has year before last, they got a member of staff in whose job is just to catch anyone who's falling between the gaps of provisions and scoop them up and make sure they're in the right place. We can't all be Cambridge University. Cambridge University is the only university that doesn't go to DSA for all its funding. It's got the RAF, reasonable assessment, reasonable accommodations fund, so it pays for it all in-house. So maybe I have a hunch that there's going to be some changes to the DSA, and this is just me speaking on a hunch. They've just done a call for evidence a couple of months ago to the Department for Education, and reading between some of the questions, I think we won't be long before universities, and I could be wrong, universities become responsible for the mentoring that goes on, because at the moment quite a lot of it happens from third-party companies, which some third-party companies, the non-for-profits, are absolutely brilliant, and they do some very, very cutting-edge, amazing stuff. I work alongside some of them. I stand in awe of them. There are some of them that try to undercut and do sort of big generic things. But if you, and this was in the recommendations of Arriving at Thriving, a great document about disability in university, that if you have a vice principal with a particularly named responsibility for making sure that these provisions like mentoring and other provisions are in place, that if these go wrong, their head will roll. And I think that's a way that we bring around institution is that very robust mandating that goes on. There we go.
Thank you. We've got quite a few questions now.
Yeah.
So I'm
Sorry, I've just read Catherine Lewis's one. Just my responses. There we go.
So yeah, just to be mindful of time, I think, so we can try and get through as many as possible. This one is from Catherine, and she says, what's your advice or approach when a mentee has effective personal strategies and communication styles, but the university or the workplace isn't accepting these and keeps expecting them to change? It can be so difficult sometimes when we spend time building self-compassion and advocacy, but this is constantly challenged outside those sessions. So maybe feeding into what you were saying about agitation as well.
So there is that. How do we create and co-advocate for students to bring around changes so that these things can happen? There's also, and we have to be really honest about this, sometimes for a particular student at a particular time, there isn't the capacity to do that. So we have to find a workaround. I don't like the word strategy. Strategy is a bit military. It goes from A to B and we invade this and we're going through there. Hop, hop, hop. Somebody get Napoleon on the phone. We've got this sorted. That's not what happens. It's that there's an issue. Let's find a way around it. Let's sort of have a workaround and wander around to find our own magical way of doing things, which kind of bypasses the issue. I haven't done this officially and I'd love to see if it works. Chat GTP works as a neuronormative translation device. So if you drop your preferred communication, particularly if it's we'll get around to it if it's not written later. But if it's a written communication, if you can drop it into ChatGPT and just say, can you do this for a very boring professor who really doesn't understand anything that comes their way, it'll come up with a nice turgid piece of text that you can put across. Likewise, if you get a big turgid piece of text that comes across, you can say, please make this more exciting. My brain has just noped out when I try to read it. It is, I'll tell you, the first time I came across it, what is it, 2 years ago, these large language models, was there was a disability practitioner that was working with a young guy with Down syndrome who was running his own gardening business, and every day or so the support worker would get a sort of text that would say 12 o'clock Jones's daffodils, and then he would take that and he'd put it into a text that he would then send to the Joneses to make sure it was fine. Now he's not needed anymore because ChatGPT does that. The guy who's running his business can actually put down just the words he needs, it puts it into neuronormative text and then fires it across. This also comes with my big warning. My worry about this neuronormative text generator is that it will take the beautiful joy of receiving an autistic essay, which is a piece of poetry in its own right, that is not the statistical mean of all essays. So I have a problem with big AI neuronormalizing everything. I'm also saying use it to neuronormalize your own stuff if you don't have the energy to get stuff through. Does that make sense?
You.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, somebody's just posted about Goblin Tools. Goblin Tools has a formalizer where you can take a spicy thought and turn it into a proper serious thought. It's also got the professor in there as well, where you can put in stuff that you're thinking, oh, I have no idea what he just said, and it turns it into something that is far more understandable and comes up with a lovely little example as well. Yeah, the Goblin Tools.
I feel duty bound to just issue a bit of a disclaimer here, or in the sense that obviously follow your own institution's guides on the use of AI and advocating AI with students. Just feel like I needed to add that little disclaimer.
Yeah, do add that one in. So I know at UCL at the moment they are very pro AI as long as you cite it. Yeah, and it is. Which I find is weird because back in my day, a long time ago, when still electronic typewriters, when I was an undergraduate, a long time ago, we would go to the pub to talk through ideas. And you come up with your ideas because you bounce them off of other people. For me, AI is just another entity to bounce ideas off of. So yeah, I'm thinking more about this as time goes by.
Thank you. Question from Hannah. Do you think these mentoring principles are applicable or could translate into support approaches for autistic, ADHD or ADHD adults in mental health services?
Right, mental health, up until the last part, I thought, yes, it applies. Mental health services are interesting because this view of mentoring is one that brings about, it's, as I said, it's a sort of small reflection of things like Greenpeace. It's a small reflection of the suffragettes. It's about bringing around social changes. Now, the mental health system needs things changed within it, but should it be the responsibility of the service users to be bringing around that change? If it's not happening, it might have to happen that way, and I think mentoring might be an interesting way of doing that. Whether that's the ideal way of doing it, I would prefer it to be good in the first place. Does that make sense? So if it's not good in the first place, mentoring can bring around change. If that inertia of that institution, of that provision, seems too great for it to be brought around internally, then maybe mentoring to create advocates to bring around change and actually have that co-production of mental health services in their own right. That's an interesting thought. So love to see that come together.
Connected to that, Sarah Jane, hello to Sarah Jane Critchley. I think you were our March speaker. Lovely to see you tonight. She's asked the question of, you mentioned that autism mentors and mental health mentors are different. Is it possible and or useful to have both there if there are mental health issues too?
So we have quite a few mentors are trained up in both different ways. What I've found quite often is there are definitely a subset of mentors who were trained as mental health mentors, found their own diagnosis, decided to sort of jump ship to the other side. The issue between the two is this nature of relapse. I think it's very important that mental health mentors try to prevent relapse of the mental health conditions. Now, if you're working with an autistic student who has mental health conditions, then we should be working on that relapse as well. But we do it in the context of the systematic injustices that they will be facing on a regular basis, all those pressures as well, which may actually inform some of the core parts of the mental health in a very different way. So I don't think they should be separate. I think that they are useful together. I think there are times when one should maybe override the other. And I have always enjoyed working in a team where there were mental health mentors and autism mentors. And now you get ADHD mentors, which usually they're autistic mentors who were sort of added extra few skills in there. And when we work together as teams, and when we have that ability to be collegiate, and it comes back to humility, to say, actually, we are one-to-one in these little rooms with students, but actually sometimes we have that professional knowledge to talk through not the individual student, but the broader ideas about what's going on, to inform ourselves, because we don't know everything. And it is that sort of radical humility that we come back to, which allows us to be people that are become catalysts for change.
Thank you. So we have 3 questions and 3 minutes. So before I
okay, we'll see what we can do.
The last 5 minutes of the so we're going to. Is it doable? Should we set ourselves this challenge?
Yeah, challenge.
Okay,
20-second
so
answers.
Jodie asks, what are your thoughts on doing blanket neurodiversity or neurodivergent condition quick screeners with students? So Leeds Beckett does a blanket dyslexia screen, but we're finding that it's not particularly effective. So for certain groups of neurodivergent people, what are your thoughts on screening tools?
But you have to have an amazing backup system if somebody actually comes across something they haven't come across before. So it's being able to inform a neurodiversity paradigm straight afterwards, or even before the screening itself, because otherwise you'll be leaving people left adrift, and that's not nice. Second question.
Hannah would love to know more about getting into mentoring as a career. Does this QR code that you have here have some guidance on that, did you say?
I really should. I don't. Please, in fact, one of the best things to do is to go to Google Jobs, particularly this time of year, and Google specialist autism mentors. And there'll be a whole list, because we don't often have enough. And you just phone up the company and say, can I? And they'll go, yes, we'll give you some training. Please start tomorrow. Yeah, that's a great way in.
And then Luke has asked the question about how do we go about helping students with limited activities and paralysis at expanding horizons despite wanting to? I have lots of ideas, but I'd love to know what Brian thinks.
Number one, you do not limit yourself to the mentoring room. You walk around campus, you talk together, you walk off campus together. And I used to walk through Windsor Park, talking as Plato did about the world and everything around us. And that momentum of being physically in other places with a person you can trust just really works really well. I have done, lessons is the wrong word, how to go to the pub, where to stand to get served. And the mathematician I was with worked out a little algorithm. Short version, always stand by the Coca-Cola machine, because the barman always goes there. And if you want to jump the queue, that's your way forward. go and play pool. Go and do some of those things as part of mentoring itself, because you're not confined to the room. There is nowhere in the room that says you have to sit on your butt and just talk.
Thank you. Excellent advice, Brian. Thank you so much. So much of what you're saying to me resonates with me as a parent as well, in terms of those, kind of ways in which you can build bridges and connect. Yeah, really, really thought-provoking. Thank you so much.
It's been a joy and a pleasure. And I've read all I've been keeping a slight eye on the chat. It's gone, you folks are brilliant. Really, really lovely. I've thoroughly enjoyed that one. That's a great one. You've got a great community going on here.
We're very, very proud of our Wellbeing Hub monthly talk community.
Yeah,
lovely,
awesome.
Lovely people. And it's great to see so many familiar names in the chat as well. So those who've been to these talks before will know that I always ask the same question to bring an end to the talks. So I ask the same question of all of our speakers, and that is, of all the things that you've shared with us tonight, of all the many, many things that you've shared with us tonight, if there was just one thing that you would like us all to go away with tonight knowing, what would it be?
Mentoring is not about getting people to fit an institution. Mentoring is about getting people to put on a great big pair of boots and give that institution a kicking. Well, that's naughty, isn't it? Just people just go, ha! It's brilliant.
That's so brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm sure I'm seeing all of your reactions on the screen. I know that this talk has gone down brilliantly. So please join me in thanking Brian. Please do go and check out the links that I posted at the very top. In fact, I am going to share them again. I've also got a link here to Brian's series of talks. Brian, when I'm copying and pasting, can you tell us a bit about the Cray talks, please?
So I run something similar to this. So I run the Cray webinars, where we talk about autism and so many different things. So you can come and join us. We have so it's the lovely, wonderful Felicity Sedgwick is coming to talk to us on October the something. The link's up there, and she's. Yeah, she's October the 3rd, thank you, which is about our university is the right place for autistic students in terms of policy, which is, so if you like that sort of thing, as I said, it's about giving the institutions a bit of a kicking. Getting involved in policy is a great way of doing that, and people think you're being useful. It's amazing. So do come along. We've also got talks coming up on employment and internships. The lovely Jo Billington will be talking about their work on adults talking about primary schools. We have next term, we have a couple of academics coming from the University of Tokyo to talk about participatory research as a Japanese concept and idea, which isn't quite there's going to be some wonderful fusing together of that kind of stuff. And then we're sort of scrolling into the next year. I think I've got almost everybody booked through to November 2025. So I'll be dropping them online as we go. It's lovely. You do have to put up with me doing questions and answers at the end and giggling an awful lot.
It's a joy, always a joy, Brian. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Remember that we've got Dr. Amy Pearson, who's joining us on the 10th of October to talk about autistic masking as a response to stigma. I hope to see many of you there. In the meantime, do watch out for the email coming into your inbox in a couple of weeks with a recording, a link to the recording of tonight's talk. If you think it's been helpful, then please do share widely. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening. I will see you next time.
Take care, people. Look after yourselves.
Thank you.